Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. The M4 iPad Pro, 13-inch or 11-inch, Nanotexture or standard glass, small storage with less RAM or big storage with more RAM. Quite a few options to consider this round because aside from choosing a size for your iPad Pro, the amount of storage you opt for will determine your ability to purchase the Nanotexture glass option, as well as whether you get a more powerful version of the M4 chip. In fact, let's go ahead and start with that. Here I've got a 2TB 13-inch iPad Pro with Nanotexture glass, and I've also got a 256GB 11-inch version with standard glass. Pretty much every option comparable would be right here between these two iPads. As you're configuring the amount of storage for your new iPad Pro, expanding this little dialog here will reveal to you that once you go for the 1TB option or above, your iPad Pro's M4 chip will get one extra CPU core as well as double the amount of unified memory. So sure, a performance gain on paper, but is it really a difference which can be noticed on an iPad? I ran some head-to-head comparisons between the maxed out 2TB version and the base model and got some interesting results. The supposedly more powerful variant was faster by a very small margin compared to the base variant when it came to exporting 15 raw photos in Lightroom for iPad. But when it came to exporting a timeline in Final Cut Pro for iPad, for some reason, the less powerful base model was somehow slightly faster than the 2TB iPad Pro. I repeated the test several times and with similar results, so I would say that one extra CPU core is not likely to bring about a performance gain significant enough to make you regret not getting a 1 or 2TB iPad Pro. However, the doubled up RAM could make a difference depending on how you use your iPad. Just to set the stage, even on the base 8GB of RAM, the iPad Pro is already a beast when it comes to multitasking. Here I've got Stage Manager set up with Photoshop, Lightroom, Resolve, and Final Cut Pro open at the same time. I've also got a Safari tab group open with a lot of tabs, one of them being Squarespace Blueprint. Squarespace Blueprint is an incredibly powerful guided design tool to help you come up with a catchy website design using the help of AI. Unlike choosing from a template, this gives you a completely personalized design from color schemes to fonts, and it even lets you tailor the tone of the copywriting that's generated. Your website is automatically optimized for every device. It's also got powerful SEO tools built in to help your site show up more often to more people and in exactly the way you want. Of course, you may want to further customize your site down the line, and with Squarespace's next-gen website editor called Fluid Engine, you can intuitively customize every little design detail with drag-and-drop technology for both desktop and mobile. With your Squarespace website, you can sell anything from products to content to time. Payments are flexible and seamless for your customers, letting you accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, or even offer the option to pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay in eligible countries. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/zycheng to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So this right here is pretty extreme as far as multitasking goes, more so on an iPad. Even on the base model with 8GB of RAM, there is nothing to complain about. It's only when you push memory to its absolute limit, then the iPad with less RAM begins offloading processes while the one with more RAM is still holding on to them. You'll notice this in the form of Safari tabs needing to reload when you revisit them after a while, or in this other example, Final Cut Pro relaunching from the project page while on my 2TB iPad with more RAM, my timeline is still loaded in, meaning it never got offloaded from unified memory. These are very minor delays, although my cat did seem to have a bit more of an issue with it than I did. We're also gonna need a quick intermission to clean up all this cat fur. Finally, something like this. After doing a bunch of stuff in other apps, Lightroom still being loaded in on 16GB of RAM, while on the base model it takes a quick moment to reload but puts you right back where you left off. It was actually very difficult to challenge the iPad Pro to the point where it needs to start offloading stuff. So that's something which will really only make a difference for the power user, which makes perfect sense that the larger amount of RAM comes only with the 1 and 2TB variants. It's also only when you go for those variants do you get the option to pay a little extra for the Nanotexture glass. Having both in front of me right now, it's not as simple of a decision as I thought it would be. For what it's designed for, it does work incredibly well at diffusing reflections. If you're using your iPad Pro with a window behind you, or if you're using it outdoors, nanotexture glass will make the difference between your screen being barely visible and rather visible. I also much prefer the way the Nanotexture touchscreen feels against my finger. It glides around quite a bit more smoothly, and it feels a lot less like rubbing the glass with your fingers, if you get what I mean. Using the Apple Pencil on nanotextured glass also feels closer to the texture of writing on paper. I find the amount of friction to be a lot more consistent on nanotexture. You'll also hear the pencil tip gliding about, which you don't on standard glass. But just because nanotexture is the option you pay extra for, it doesn't necessarily mean you might prefer it over standard glass. Because here's a few things that make me go, on nanotexture glass. If you're in a bright room, the indirect lights being diffused by the nanotexture will result in this grey wash, which lowers the overall contrast of your image. If you're in the dark, however, not to worry, the nanotexture does not take away from the incredible black levels of that tandem OLED display. However, if you look at high-frequency detail up close, they'll appear slightly softened as a result of the nanotexture's diffusion. When looking at areas displaying solid white, you'll also notice a grainy look from the nanotexture, especially when you're scrolling. The nanotexture finish itself also seems to not be the exact same nanotexture finish as the one you get on the studio display. There's very likely adjustments made to account for the fact that the iPad display is designed to be touched, unlike the studio display. That being said, the iPad's nanotexture does not extend to the bezels, so there's always this distinct glossy frame around it. I much prefer the studio display's approach, full nanotexture on the front with only a circular break around the webcam. But like every other Apple product with nanotexture glass, the iPad Pro also comes with its very own cleaning cloth, but only if you option nanotexture. Interestingly enough, it's not the same as the $19 Apple polishing cloth. The iPad's cloth looks more microfiber compared to the more fuzzy polishing cloth. But even if you don't option nanotexture glass on your iPad Pro, it's not like reflections are gonna straight up ruin your viewing experience, because the anti-reflective treatment on standard glass is actually already excellent. It's extremely apparent how reduced reflections are, especially when we compare it to this iPad with a tempered glass screen protector installed. Speaking of which, if you plan to put a screen protector on your iPad anyway, it would defeat the purpose of nanotexture. Finally, there's the question of 11-inch or 13-inch. It would make sense to go for the 13-inch if you want the absolute thinnest iPad, because it's no secret that the 11-inch is slightly thicker at 5.3mm compared to 5.1. In reality though, that 0.2mm difference is almost indiscernible. Put both iPads on a flat surface and it's actually a challenge to tell which one of them is thicker. So if the prospect of a thicker iPad is putting you off getting the 11-inch, don't. In fact, when it comes to weight, picking up the 13-inch will likely make you go, this is very light for its size. But when you pick up the 11-inch iPad Pro, it straight up feels impossibly light. I personally went straight for the 11-inch because in my mind, this has always been the default size for the iPad. It feels just nice when you hold it in your hands. That, and it's also the first 11-inch iPad to get an XDR display. Previously, only the 12.9-inch models with M1 and M2 received that liquid retina XDR display with mini LED technology. Now, thanks to tandem OLED, both sizes get the same quality of display. 13-inch has slightly more resolution, but the pixel density is exactly the same between both sizes. Battery life is also rated to be similar among both sizes, so there's really not much else to consider except how big of a screen you want and how much that extra number row on your on-screen keyboard means to you. There is actually one more thing to consider. To be fair, I did say not much else and not nothing else, and that's the speakers in the 13-inch are better. They're not using the exact same drivers for some reason, and it's not a day and night difference, but they do sound a bit bassier on the 13-inch. Finally, if you option a cellular iPad Pro, which this 13-inch is, it's eSIM only now, so you will not find a physical SIM tray like you would on the previous generation. And that should be just about everything I'm aware of. Hopefully enough to help you choose an iPad Pro, and I'll be seeing you around.